Kirith pressed her nose against the cold metal wall and tried to make herself smaller. The hallway was busy with important people walking to important meetings. She did not want them to notice her. Her rust-colored fur was clean and brushed. Her amber eyes were bright and alert. But none of that mattered. She was Vulpine, and Vulpines were servants. Everyone knew this. The datapad in her hands felt heavy. It contained numbers that made her stomach hurt with worry. Big numbers that were wrong. Very wrong. But who would listen to her? Kirith had worked on Nexus Station for 3 years. The station was huge, like a small city floating in space. Ships came from all over the galaxy to trade and make deals. Important aliens lived here. They made decisions that affected billions of people on hundreds of worlds. She was not one of those important aliens. She was a data clerk. She sat in a small room deep inside the station and checked numbers all day. The work was boring, but she was good at it. Her brain saw patterns that others missed. It was a Vulpine thing. Her people were smart, even if no one else believed it. The trouble started 3 days ago. She was checking trade agreements for the big assembly meeting. The assembly happened once every 5 years. Leaders from 47 star systems would come to make new laws and sign new deals. The numbers in the agreements were wrong. Not a little wrong. Very wrong. If someone signed these papers, many worlds would lose money. Lots of money. Some might even go hungry. Kira, single quotes, had checked the numbers 5 times. She had run them through 3 different computers. The mistake was real. Someone had to know. Her supervisor was Veltar, an Altarian with blue skin and 4 arms. He thought he was very smart because Altarians ruled many worlds. He did not think Vulpines could be smart. "Sir," Kirith had said, standing by his desk, "there is a problem with the trade agreements." Veltar did not look up from his own work. "What kind of problem?" "The numbers are wrong. If these papers are signed, 17 worlds will lose billions of credits. Some might not have enough food next year." Now Veltar looked at her. His 4 eyes were narrow with anger. "Are you telling me that you found an error that our best Altarian analysts missed?" "Yes, sir. I can show you." "No." Veltar stood up. He was twice as tall as Kirith. "You will not insult the intelligence of your betters." Vulpines check data. They do not think about data. Go back to your work. Kirith's ears drooped. "But sir, the mistake." "There is no mistake. Altarians do not make mistakes. You are seeing patterns that do not exist. It is a Vulpine weakness. Now go." She went back to her small room. But she could not forget the wrong numbers. They sat in her mind like a painful thorn. The next day, she tried again. This time, she went to see Commander Ziktos, a Centauran who ran station security. Centaurans were not as smart as Altarians, but they were strong and honest. Maybe he would listen. Kirith waited outside his office for 2 hours. When he finally saw her, she explained about the numbers as quickly as she could. Commander Ziktos listened. Then he shook his big head. "Little fox, I know you mean well, but these things are not for you to worry about. Smart people are handling the important stuff. You just do your job." "But Commander, if I could just show you the data." "No." His voice was firm but not mean. "You should not bother yourself with things above your level. It will only make you unhappy. Go back to work." That evening, Kirith tried one more time. She found Minister Helen from Rigel 7. The minister was walking to dinner with several other important aliens. "Excuse me," Kirith said, following them down the hall. "Minister, I need to tell you about a problem with the trade agreements." The minister stopped walking. The other aliens stopped too. They all stared at Kirith like she had done something very rude. "What is this?" Minister Helen asked. "Why is a servant speaking to me?" "I am not just a servant," Kirith said, trying to sound brave. "I found an error that could hurt many worlds. Please, if you would just look." One of the other aliens, a tall being with silver skin, laughed. "The little pet thinks she can do math." They all walked away, still laughing. Kira had stood alone in the hallway, feeling smaller than ever. She even tried talking to the synthetics, the robot beings who helped run the station. But they just said her concerns were not relevant data from authorized source and rolled away. Now it was the day before the assembly would begin. In 2 days, the wrong numbers would become law. Billions of people might suffer, and no one would listen to the one person who had found the mistake. Kira and H sat in the observation deck, looking out at space. Through the big windows, she could see ships arriving from all over the galaxy. Each ship brought important people who would make important decisions. She pressed her hands against the glass and felt very alone. Her people had always been treated this way. 300 years ago, the Altarians had conquered the Vulpine homeworld. They said it was for everyone's good. They said Vulpines needed protection because they were not smart enough to take care of themselves. But that was not true. Vulpines were smart. They just saw things differently. They saw connections and patterns. They understood how small things could become big problems. But no one wanted to hear this. A group of Altarians walked past, talking loudly about their plans for the assembly. They did not even see Kira sitting there. To them, she was just part of the furniture. More ships kept arriving. Soon, the most powerful beings in the galaxy would gather in the great halls above her head. They would make decisions about war and peace, about trade and money, about the lives of trillions of people. And they would do it with wrong numbers, because no one would listen to a Vulpine. Kirith closed her eyes and tried not to cry. Tomorrow, everything would begin, and there was nothing she could do to stop the disaster she could see coming. The great assembly hall was full of colors and sounds that Kirith had never seen before. She pressed herself against the service door and watched through a small window as delegates from 47 star systems took their seats. The Altarians sat in the front rows, their blue skin shining under the bright lights. Their seats were made of real wood from their homeworld, carved with symbols of their power. Behind them sat the Centaurans in chairs of polished metal. The Regelians had brought crystal seats that glowed with soft light dot at the very back, almost hidden in shadows, were the small wooden benches for the lesser species. Kirith could see a few Cantorians there, their gray skin making them almost invisible. Some Deltans sat quietly with their heads down. And there, in the furthest corner, was the single chair marked for any Vulpine who might need to deliver a message. It was not really a chair. It was more like a stool, and it faced away from the main floor, so whoever sat there could not even see the speakers properly. Kirit had never sat in that chair. She had never been important enough to deliver messages to the assembly. Now she wondered if she ever would be. The ceremony began with music that made her fur stand up. 3 different orchestras played from floating platforms above the hall. The sound was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It reminded everyone who had power and who did not. Grand Admiral Velshan of the Altarian Empire stood to speak first. He was very old and very tall, with skin so blue it was almost black. When he spoke, everyone listened. "Welcome, honored delegates, to this gathering of civilized worlds," he said. His voice filled the entire hall. For 5,000 years, the Consortium has brought peace and order to this galaxy. We have done this by understanding that some are born to lead and others to follow, some to think and others to serve. The other Altarians clapped. So did most of the other delegates. Kirith felt sick. In the next 3 days, the Grand Admiral continued, "We will sign agreements that will guide our trade for the next decade. These agreements have been carefully prepared by the finest minds in the galaxy. Kirath gripped the door handle so hard, her claws left marks in the metal. Those finest minds had made a terrible mistake. But no one would believe her. The morning sessions were about military matters. Kirath could not understand all of it, but she knew it was important. The consortium had to protect trade routes from pirates. They had to keep smaller worlds from fighting each other. She watched as speakers took turns at the great podium. Each delegate was announced with their full titles and honors. Some had names so long it took a whole minute just to say them all. His Imperial Excellency, Lord Commander of the Seven Moons, Defender of the Crystal Nebula, Master of the Void Fleets, Admiral Tekvar the Mighty. The crowd cheered. Admiral Tekvar was a Centauran who had won many battles. He was a hero to his people. When it was time for lunch, Kirath had to work. She helped serve food in the great dining hall. The delegates sat at long tables covered with white cloth. They ate food from their homeworlds and talked about important things. Kirath carried trays of drinks to each table. She was supposed to be invisible. The delegates talked around her like she was not there. "The Regelian trade proposals are quite reasonable," said one Altarian minister. "Yes, but their shipping routes need better protection," replied a Centauran general. They were talking about the same trade agreements that had the wrong numbers. Kirath wanted to scream. She wanted to drop her tray and shout the truth. But she kept walking and serving drinks at the Altarian table. Veltar was talking loudly to anyone who would listen. "The efficiency of my data processing unit has improved by 12% this year," he said. "I have trained my staff to very high standards." Kirath knew he was talking about her and the other Vulpines who worked under him. They were not staff to him. They were property. "How do you manage the lesser species so well?" asked another Altarian. "Simple," Veltar said, cutting into his meat. "You give them clear rules and do not let them think too much. Thinking makes them confused and unhappy. Better to keep them focused on simple tasks." The others nodded like this was very wise. Kirath moved to the next table before she did something that would get her in trouble. At the Regalian table, they were discussing the exact numbers that were wrong. Minister Helen had a datapad in front of him. He was pointing at figures and nodding with satisfaction. "These projections look very good," he said. "My world will benefit greatly from the new shipping rates. The shipping rates that were calculated wrong. The rates that would bankrupt his world if they were signed into law." Kirath set down a glass of water next to the minister's elbow. For a moment, she thought about speaking. She could whisper the truth about the numbers. But the minister did not even look at her. To him, she was just another servant. That afternoon, the sessions focused on trade. This was when the wrong agreements would be discussed. Kirath found reasons to clean near the service doors so she could listen. The speakers talked about shipping routes and tax rates. They discussed mining rights and agricultural exports. Everything sounded very smart and well planned. But Kirath could see the mistake growing bigger and bigger. Every time someone mentioned the projected profits from the new agreements, she wanted to cover her ears. They were all wrong. So very wrong. A Cantorian delegate named Jexley tried to ask a question about the numbers. But his voice was small, and he spoke with a heavy accent. The other delegates had trouble understanding him. "I am sorry," said Grand Admiral Velshin. "Could the honored representative speak more clearly?" Jexley tried again, but he was nervous now. His words got more jumbled. Finally, he sat down without asking his question. Kirath saw him looking at his own datapad with confusion. He could see something was wrong too, but he could not find the words to explain it. As the day ended, Kirath felt more hopeless than ever. Tomorrow would be the second day of the assembly. On the third day, they would sign the agreements. Then the mistake would become law. She walked back to her small room in the lower levels of the station. The hallways here were gray and narrow. No beautiful decorations. No soft lighting. This was where the servants lived. Her room had a bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out at space. She sat on her bed and held her head in her hands. Outside her window, more ships were arriving. She could see the lights of shuttles carrying the last few delegates to the station. Tomorrow, all the most powerful beings in the galaxy would be here, and none of them would listen to her. Kirith thought about her people back on their homeworld. They lived in small towns now, working in factories and farms owned by Altarians. They had once built great cities and made beautiful art. But that was long ago, before the conquest. Her grandmother had told her stories about the old days, about Vulpine scientists who had mapped the stars, and Vulpine philosophers who had written books about justice and truth. We were never meant to be servants, her grandmother had said. We were meant to be partners, to help and be helped, to share what we see and learn from what others see. But those days were gone. Now Vulpines were just workers and servants. Their ideas did not matter. Their insights were ignored. Kirat had looked at her datapad one more time. The wrong numbers stared back at her. Tomorrow, those numbers would be discussed by the most important people in the galaxy. And the day after that, they would become law. She turned off the pad and tried to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. She kept thinking about all the worlds that would suffer because of one simple mistake that no one would let her fix. The human ship arrived early in the morning, like a silver star against the black of space. Kirith watched it dock from her small window. She had heard about humans, but had never seen any in person. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only learned to travel between stars 50 years ago. Most of the older species thought they were interesting, but not very important. They were too young, too different, too willing to ignore the rules that kept everything in order. But they were here for the assembly. That meant they had something the consortium wanted. Kiradh had work to do. Veltar had given her a stack of data tablets to deliver to all the new delegations. It was simple work, the kind that any servant could do. Walk to a door, knock, hand over the tablets, leave. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look anyone in the eye. The Altarian delegation got their tablets first. They barely looked at her when she knocked. A secretary took the tablets and closed the door without a word. The Centaurans were a little better. Their guard thanked her gruffly and took the tablets with a nod. At least they saw her as a living being. The Regellians made her wait outside for 20 minutes before someone came to collect the tablets. They did not speak to her at all. When Kiradh reached the human delegation's quarters, she expected more of the same. She would knock, hand over the tablets, and leave. Then she could go back to her small room and worry about the wrong numbers that no one would fix. But when she arrived at the human quarters, she found something strange. One of the humans was sitting in the hallway outside their door. She was a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing simple blue clothes, instead of the fancy robes that other delegates wore. The woman was looking at a datapad with a worried expression. Kirith could see numbers on the screen. Trade calculations. The same kind of numbers that had been keeping her awake at night. Kirith stopped walking. She knew she should just deliver the tablets and leave. But something about the woman's expression made her pause. The human looked troubled, like she could see that something was wrong, but could not figure out what it was. For a moment, Kirith considered speaking. She could tell this human about the mistake in the numbers. But then she remembered all the times she had tried to warn people. All the times she had been ignored or laughed at or told to know her place. She started to walk past the human woman. But then the woman looked up and saw her. "Oh, hello," the woman said. Her voice was warm and friendly. "You look like someone with something important on your mind." Kirith froze. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Usually, People either ignored her completely or ordered her to do something. But this human was looking at her like she was a real person with real thoughts. I have data tablets for your delegation, Kirith managed to say. The woman stood up. She was tall but not threatening, and she moved slowly so she would not scare Kirith. Thank you, she said. I'm Ambassador Sarah Chun, and you are? No delegate had ever asked Kirith her name before. Kirith, she said quietly. It's nice to meet you, Kirith. Ambassador Chun smiled. You know, I was just reviewing these trade projections, and something about them feels off. But I can't quite put my finger on what's wrong. She gestured to the datapad in her hand. It showed the same numbers that had been haunting Kirith for days. Would you like to sit down? Ambassador Chun asked, pointing to the space beside her on the bench. You look troubled. Sometimes it helps to share what's bothering us. Kirith stared at the ambassador in shock. She was being invited to sit, not ordered to stand while someone else sat, not dismissed or ignored. Invited to sit as an equal. I shouldn't, Kirith said. If someone sees me sitting with a delegate, then they'll see two people having a conversation, Ambassador Chun said simply. There's nothing wrong with that. Please, sit. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Slowly, carefully, Kirith sat down on the bench. The cushions were soft. She had never sat on furniture this nice before. Now, Ambassador Chun said, sitting back down beside her. What's troubling you? For a moment, Kirith could not speak. Her throat felt tight. No one had asked her that question in years. No one cared what troubled her. The numbers, she finally whispered. The trade agreements. They're wrong. Ambassador Chun leaned forward with interest. Wrong how? The shipping calculations. Someone made an error in the base rates. If these agreements are signed, 17 worlds will lose billions of credits. Some might not have enough food next year. Instead of laughing or dismissing her, Ambassador Chun asked, Can you show me? With shaking hands, Kirith took out her own datapad. She had copied the relevant files, even though she was not supposed to have them. She showed Ambassador Chun the original calculations and then pointed out where the error had been made. See here? Kirith said, pointing to a long string of numbers. This base shipping rate is supposed to be calculated using the standard consortium formula, but someone used the old formula from 20 years ago. The numbers look right at first, but when you multiply them across all the trade routes, she ran the calculations again, showing how the small error became bigger and bigger as it spread through the entire system. Ambassador Chen watched carefully. She asked smart questions. She made Kirith explain each step, and she listened like Kirith's words actually mattered. This is incredible work, Ambassador Chen said when Kirith finished. You found an error that could have caused enormous suffering. How did you spot this when the official analysts missed it? Kirith felt her ears droop. I'm Vulpine. We see patterns differently, but no one believes our analysis. I tried to tell my supervisor and other delegates, but they wouldn't listen because of who you are, not what you were saying, Ambassador Chen finished. Her voice was angry, but not at Kirith Achut. That's not just wrong, it's stupid. Good information is good information, no matter who finds it. She stood up and paced a few steps, thinking hard. Kirith, I want to ask you something important. Would you be willing to present this information to the Assembly's Economic Committee? I can arrange for you to speak tomorrow. Me? Kirith's voice came out as a squeak. Speak to the committee? But I'm just a data clerk. I'm not even supposed to have these files. You're not just anything, Ambassador Chun said firmly. You're an expert who found a critical error that could have hurt millions of people. Your species, your job title, none of that matters. What matters is that you're right, and people need to know. Kirith felt tears starting in her eyes. The other delegates won't listen to a Vulpine. They think we're too stupid to understand important things. Ambassador Chun sat back down and looked Kirith in the eye. Then we'll make them listen. I'll introduce you as my valued colleague and expert consultant. Anyone who wants to argue with your findings will have to argue with the facts, not your species. But what if they punish me? What if my supervisor gets angry? Then they'll have to deal with the human delegation, Ambassador Chen said. We have a saying on my world. Truth doesn't become less true because someone doesn't want to hear it. And another one. The worth of a person isn't determined by what others think of them. She stood up again and offered Kirith her hand. Will you help me prevent this disaster? Will you trust me to make sure your voice is heard? Kirith looked at the offered hand. In her entire life, no one had ever asked for her help with something important. No one had ever treated her like she had value. She reached out and took Ambassador Chun's hand. Yes, she said. I'll help. Ambassador Chun smiled. Good. Tomorrow, we're going to show the galaxy what happens when people actually listen to good ideas, no matter where they come from. As Kirith walked back to her quarters that evening, she felt something she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, someone had sat beside her like she was important, like her thoughts mattered, like she was worth listening to. Tomorrow, she would speak to the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She was terrified, but she was also something else. She was hopeful. Kirith could not eat breakfast. Her stomach was too tight with worry. In 2 hours, she would stand before the Assembly's Economic Committee and speak about the wrong numbers. She had never been so scared in her life. Ambassador Chun came to get her personally. She was dressed in her formal diplomatic robes, but she still wore the same kind smile that had changed everything yesterday. How are you feeling? She asked as they walked toward the committee chamber. Like I might be sick, Kirith said honestly. That's normal. Even experienced diplomats get nervous before important meetings. But remember, you're not going in there as a servant or a Vulpine. You're going in as an expert who found something vital that others missed. They stopped outside the committee chamber doors. Through the glass, Kirith could see delegates from 12 different worlds sitting around a huge oval table. All of them were important. All of them were powerful. And in a few minutes, she would have to convince them they were wrong. What if they don't believe me? Kirith asked. Then we'll make them believe by showing them facts they can't argue with, Ambassador Chun said. And if they try to dismiss you because of your species, I'll remind them that wisdom comes from evidence, not prejudice. She put a gentle hand on Kirith's shoulder. You saved the galaxy yesterday, even if no one knows it yet. Today, we're just going to make it official. The committee chamber was even more impressive up close. The ceiling was high and painted with scenes of trade ships traveling between the stars. The table was made of dark wood that gleamed under bright lights. Each delegate sat in a chair marked with the symbol of their world. Grand Admiral Velshin was there, looking as stern and powerful as ever. Minister Helen from Rigel 7 sat across from him, along with delegates from the Centauran Union, the Deltoid Republic, and 8 other major worlds. At the head of the table sat Committee Chairman Bextar, an ancient Altarian whose blue skin had faded to silver with age. He had been making trade deals since before humans even knew other species existed. The committee recognizes Ambassador Chun of the Human Federation. Chairman Bextar said in his deep voice. Ambassador Chun stood up smoothly. Thank you, Chairman. I have brought with me today a valued colleague who has discovered a critical error in the proposed trade agreements. I would like to introduce Kirith, our expert consultant on economic analysis. A murmur went around the table. Several delegates looked confused. A few looked annoyed. Ambassador Chun, said Minister Helen, Is that a Vulpine? Yes, she is, Ambassador Chun replied calmly. And she has found an error that could save our world's billions of credits and prevent serious hardship. Grand Admiral Velshan's 4 eyes narrowed. With respect, Ambassador, this is highly irregular. The Vulpine species serves in support roles. They do not analyze policy or address the assembly. With respect, Admiral, Ambassador Chun said, her voice getting a little harder. Are you suggesting that truth becomes less valid based on the species of whoever discovers it? Before anyone could answer, she gestured for Kirith to stand. Kirith's legs felt weak, but she managed to get to her feet. Honored delegates, Ambassador Chung continued. I present our colleague Kirith, who has identified computational errors that escaped our initial review. I believe her findings deserve our attention. Chairman Baxtar looked uncomfortable. Ambassador, while we appreciate the human dedication to inclusive practices, this committee deals with matters of galactic importance. Perhaps your consultant could submit her concerns in writing. No, Ambassador Chun said firmly. She will present them now, in person, to this committee. Unless you're telling me that this committee is too busy to prevent an economic disaster. The word disaster got everyone's attention. Chairman Baxtar sighed and gestured for Kirith to approach the presentation screen. Very well. The committee will hear from Kirath. Kirath walked to the front of the room on shaking legs. The big screen lit up, waiting for her data. Every delegate was staring at her. Some looked curious. Others looked annoyed or amused. She connected her datapad to the screen. The numbers appeared, large and clear for everyone to see. Honored delegates, Kirith began, her voice barely above a whisper. Speak up, called someone from the back. Kirith took a deep breath and tried again. Honored delegates, there is an error in the base shipping rate calculations for the new trade agreements. She pointed to the first set of numbers on the screen. These calculations use the consortium shipping formula from 23 years ago. The current formula has been updated 3 times since then to account for fuel cost changes and route efficiency improvements. Minister Helen leaned forward. Are you saying our analysts made a mistake? Yes, sir. If you look here, Kirith brought up a comparison chart. The old formula gives rates that look reasonable at first glance. But when applied across all proposed trade routes, the compound error becomes significant. She ran the calculations live, showing how the small error multiplied through the system. The room grew quiet as the numbers built up on the screen. The result, Kirith said, gaining confidence as she saw some delegates taking notes, is that 17 worlds would pay approximately 40% more for shipping than the agreements indicate. Over 10 years, this represents. She brought up the final calculation. The number was huge. 230 billion credits and unexpected costs. The room erupted. Several delegates started talking at once. Minister Helen was studying his own datapad with growing alarm. Even Grand Admiral Velshan looked concerned. This is absurd, said someone from the Deltoid delegation. Our finest economists reviewed these agreements. They would not miss such a basic error. Perhaps, said Ambassador Chun, they missed it because they assumed their initial work was perfect. Sometimes fresh eyes see what familiar ones overlook. Chairman Baxtar was running his own calculations on his personal datapad. His silver face was growing darker. These numbers, if they are correct, Kirith said, surprising herself with her own firmness. I have checked them 17 times using 4 different computational methods. But how did you even access these files? Demanded Grand Admiral Velshan. This data is classified at the highest levels. Kirith felt her courage wavering. She had taken the files without permission. But Ambassador Chun stepped forward. She accessed them because she was doing her job, the ambassador said. She reviews economic data every day. The error was in files she processes regularly. The only unusual thing was that she recognized its importance and tried to report it. Tried to report it? Chairman Beckstar asked. Yes, Ambassador Chun said, her voice getting colder. She tried to warn her supervisor, Valtar. She tried to warn Commander Ziktos. She tried to warn Minister Helen himself. All of them dismissed her concerns without even looking at her analysis. The room was silent now. Minister Helen was staring at his datapad with growing horror. My world. If these calculations are correct, we would lose nearly 20 billion credits over the next decade. Our agricultural exports alone would bankrupt half your farming regions, Kirith finished quietly. More delegates were checking the numbers now. Datapads were lighting up all around the table as the reality of the error became clear. How is this possible? Asked the Centauran delegate. Our best analysts missed something that a Vulpine data clerk found, Ambassador Chen interrupted. Maybe it's time to ask why we ignore entire species when they might have valuable insights to offer. Grand Admiral Velshin stood up slowly. His pride was clearly wounded, but he was also practical. If these calculations are verified, we cannot sign the agreements as written. The economic damage would be substantial. Chairman Beckstar nodded grimly. The committee will need to review all calculations immediately. The signing ceremony is tomorrow. It gets worse, Kirith said, bringing up another screen. While checking the shipping rates, I found 2 additional errors in the resource allocation formulas. The next hour was chaos. Delegates called their homeworlds. Economists were summoned. Emergency sessions were scheduled. The careful order of the assembly was turned upside down by numbers on a screen. Through it all, Kirith answered questions and explained her findings. The delegates stopped treating her like a servant and started treating her like what she was, an expert who had saved them from disaster. When the emergency session finally ended, Minister Helen approached Kirith directly. I owe you an apology, he said. And my world owes you a debt we can never repay. If you had not found this error, you would have signed agreements that hurt your people, Kirith said. I could not let that happen, even though we would not listen to you, the minister said sadly. Even though we treated you as if your thoughts had no value. Ambassador Chun joined them. Perhaps, she said to the minister, this experience will help the consortium consider the wisdom of judging ideas by their merit rather than by who presents them. As they left the committee chamber, Kirith felt like a different person than the one who had entered. For the first time in her life, she had been heard. Her ideas had mattered. She had had help prevent suffering for billions of people. So, Ambassador Chen said as they walked down the corridor, how would you like to become a permanent consultant to human diplomatic missions? We could use someone with your analytical skills. Kirith had stopped walking. You mean, leave the sta 6 months later, Kirith stood at the window of her new office aboard the human diplomatic vessel Harmony. Outside Nexus Station grew larger as they approached. She was coming home, but everything was different now. She wore clothes that marked her as a senior analyst for the Human Federation. Her datapad contained files from 6 different star systems, all marked with her recommendations and insights. In her personal bag, she carried letters from planetary governments, thanking her for preventing economic disasters they never knew had threatened them. But the most important thing she carried was something invisible: confidence. For 6 months, she had worked alongside humans who valued her mind and trusted her judgment. She had learned that her thoughts were not just valid but valuable. Nervous about going back? Asked Captain Martinez, joining her at the window. A little, Kirith admitted. It's strange to return to a place where I was nobody and now be someone who matters. You always mattered, the captain said gently. The difference is that now other people know it too. The Harmony docked smoothly. As they walked through the familiar corridors of Nexus Station, Kirith noticed how different everything looked through her new eyes. The grand halls that had once seemed impossibly elegant now just looked impressive. The delegates who had once seemed like gods now looked like people doing important but not mystical work. Some things had changed on the station too. She saw Cantorian technicians working alongside Altarian engineers. A Dalton advisor was explaining something to a group of Centauran officers who were listening respectfully. The rigid separation between species was starting to crack. Her first stop was the diplomatic quarter, where she needed to deliver analysis reports to the consortium's Economic Council. The same council that had once dismissed her as a servant now requested her input on major trade decisions. As she walked through the council chambers, she passed the small stool in the back corner where Vulpines used to sit when forced to deliver messages. It was still there, but now there was a proper chair next to it. And according to Ambassador Chun, 3 Vulpines from other worlds had been hired as economic advisors in the past month. Her second stop was more personal. She took the elevator down to the lower levels, to the gray corridors where the station workers lived. Her old supervisor, Veltar, had requested a meeting. His office looked the same, but he seemed smaller somehow. His forearms moved nervously as she entered, and his blue skin had a grayish tinge that suggested he had not been sleeping well. "Kirath," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. I wanted to congratulate you on your new position." "Thank you," she said simply. "I also wanted to say." He paused, struggling with words that did not come easily to him. "I wanted to say that perhaps I was hasty in dismissing your concerns about the trade agreements." "You were," Kirath said. She was not angry, just stating a fact. "Yes, well?" Veltar straightened his shoulders, trying to recover his dignity. "I hope you understand that I was simply following established procedures. The chain of command exists for good reasons. The chain of command that nearly caused an economic disaster because it prevented important information from reaching people who needed it." Veltar winced. "That was an unfortunate oversight." Kirath looked around the office that had once seemed so intimidating. Now it just looked like a small room where a frightened man did small work. "Veltar," she said, "I came here to ask you something. There are still Vulpines working under you. When they find problems or have insights, will you listen to them now?" Of course. If they have legitimate concerns, they will have legitimate concerns," Kirath said firmly. "My people see patterns that others miss. We always have. The question is whether you will respect those insights or continue to waste them." She left him with that thought and continued deeper into the station's lower levels. Her real destination was the small quarters where the Vulpine workers lived. Word of her visit had spread quickly. By the time she reached the common area, a dozen of her people were waiting. They looked at her with a mixture of pride and disbelief. One of their own had risen from data clerk to senior analyst. It was something they had never imagined possible. "Tell us what it's like," asked Genra, a young Vulpine who worked in maintenance. "Working with people who listen to you. It's like breathing fresh air after being underground your whole life," Kirath said. "It's like discovering you have a voice that matters." She spent the evening sharing her experiences. She told them about humans who asked for her opinion and genuinely wanted to hear it. About meetings where her analysis shaped important decisions. About being treated as a valued colleague instead of an intelligent tool. "But how did you do it?" asked Morden, an older Vulpine who had worked on the station longer than anyone. "How did you make them see you differently?" "I didn't change who I was," Kirath said. "I found someone who could see who I already was. Ambassador Chun didn't make me smart or valuable. She just recognized that I already was those things." The conversation continued late into the night. Some of the Vulpines were skeptical. Others were hopeful. A few were planning to apply for positions with the Human Diplomatic Corps, which had begun actively recruiting from species that the consortium traditionally overlooked. The next morning, Kirat had meetings with several other delegations. Word of her success had spread throughout the diplomatic community. The Regelians wanted her to review their mining contracts. The Centaurans were asking for help with supply chain analysis. Even some Altarian worlds were quietly requesting her services. But the most important meeting was in the afternoon. She was scheduled to review new legislation with the consortium's legal committee. As she walked toward the meeting room, she noticed someone sitting alone in the hallway outside. Thought it was a young Cantorian engineer named Lixtal. He was staring at a datapad with a confused and worried expression. Kireth recognized the look immediately. It was the same expression she had worn 6 months ago when she first discovered the trade agreement errors. Kireth slowed her pace. The Cantorians were another species that the consortium considered lesser. They were assigned to technical work, but rarely consulted on important matters. Like the Vulpines, they were treated as intelligent tools rather than thinking beings. She remembered Ambassador Chun sitting in this same hallway, looking troubled by numbers she could not quite understand. She remembered the kindness in the ambassador's voice when she had invited a frightened Vulpine to sit beside her and share her concerns. Kirat H made a decision. "Excuse me," she said, stopping in front of the young engineer. "You look like someone with something important on your mind. Would you like to sit and tell me what's troubling you?" Lixtal looked up in surprise. He saw Kareth's human diplomatic insignia and analyst credentials, and his gray skin flushed with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, starting to stand. "I didn't mean to block the hallway. I was just trying to understand these safety calculations, but something doesn't look right." Kirith finished. She gestured to the space beside him on the bench. "May I sit with you?" Sometimes 2 minds are better than 1. The young Cantorian stared at her in shock. A senior analyst was asking to sit with him, to help him with his work. "Yes, please," he said. Kirat had sat down beside him, just as Ambassador Chun had sat beside her. "Now, show me what's bothering you." For the next 20 minutes, she listened as Lixtal explained his concerns about safety protocols for the station's new fusion reactors. His analysis was brilliant, but he had been afraid to share it because Cantorians were just engineers, and not supposed to question the designs approved by senior species. As Karath studied his work, she realized he had found a potentially catastrophic flaw in the reactor shielding. If no one fixed it, the entire station could be at risk. "This is excellent work," she told him. "We need to get this to the safety committee immediately." "We?" Lixtal asked. "You found the problem," Kirith said. "You should be the one to present the solution. I'll help you prepare and make sure they listen to you properly." She saw tears starting in the young engineer's eyes. "You mean, you believe me? You think my analysis is worth sharing?" "I think your analysis could save thousands of lives," Kirith said. "And I know what it's like to have important information that no one wants to hear, because of who you are instead of what you've discovered." They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing Lixtal's presentation. Kirat H taught him the same lessons Ambassador Chun had taught her. Speak with confidence, stick to the facts, and never apologize for having valuable insights. The safety committee meeting was scheduled for the next day. As Kirith walked Lixtal through the presentation one more time, she thought about how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had been the one sitting alone in the hallway, afraid and ignored. Now she was helping another young mind find its voice. That evening, she stood once again at the observation deck where she had once felt so hopeless. Through the great windows, she watched ships arrive from across the galaxy. But now she saw them differently. Each ship carried not just cargo or important passengers, but minds and perspectives that could benefit everyone. The next morning, she watched Lixtal present his findings to